We're pinned down. The desperate radio call crackled through as elite Navy SEALs found themselves trapped in an impossible situation with no way out. The unexpected salvation came from the most unlikely source, a college student who abandoned her textbooks for a precision weapon that would change everything. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The night air shattered as gunfire erupted across the Tacoma Port Industrial Complex. What had begun as a routine intelligence-gathering mission had descended into chaos within minutes. Lieutenant John Smith pressed his body against a concrete pillar, the cold surface a stark contrast to the heat of battle surrounding him. "Status report," John barked, his voice barely audible over the relentless barrage of bullets pinging off metal and concrete throughout the cavernous warehouse. "3 magazines left, sir," came the strained reply from his right. The lieutenant's gaze darted across the dimly lit space to where Chief Robert Johnson lay sprawled against the stack of wooden pallets, his tactical vest darkened with blood. The chief's normally stoic face had gone ashen, his breathing labored as Maria Davis worked frantically to stem the bleeding from a wound in his upper thigh. "Pressure points not working," Maria muttered, her medical training evident in her methodical movements despite the chaos. The team medic's hands were slick with blood as she tightened a makeshift tourniquet. Bullet might have nicked the femoral artery. John wiped sweat from his brow, leaving a streak of grime across his forehead. Outside, voices shouted commands in a language he recognized but couldn't translate fast enough to be useful. The SEAL team had walked straight into an ambush, professionally executed and clearly planned. This was no random encounter. "Thompson, Riley, conserve ammo, single shots only," John ordered to the 2 SEALs covering the eastern approach. He keyed his radio again, the device sticky with blood from when he dragged the chief to cover. "Command, this is Foxhound Actual. We are pinned down with 1 critical. Request immediate extraction." The radio crackled with static before a voice responded, clinical and detached from the reality of their situation. "Foxhound, be advised, nearest QRF is engaged elsewhere. Extraction timeline 4 hours minimum. Hold position." 4 hours? Maria's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. "He won't make it 4 hours." John met her gaze, both of them knowing what remained unsaid. None of them might make it 4 hours. Their ammunition wouldn't last half that time. A fresh volley of gunfire peppered their position, forcing everyone lower. John counted at least 3 different calibers. Their attackers were well-equipped and coordinating their assault to conserve ammunition while keeping the SEALs trapped. "Sir, they're moving to flank us," warned the youngest team member, his voice steady despite the dire circumstances. John nodded grimly, checking his own weapon. 15 rounds left. Outside, boots crunched on gravel as the enemy tightened their noose. The lieutenant looked at his team, men and women he trained with, fought alongside, and now might die with on American soil. "Dig in," he ordered. "We're not done yet." Lieutenant John Smith scanned the faces of his team, his gaze meeting each pair of eyes that reflected the same grim reality. These weren't rookies. They were seasoned warriors who had survived the harshest battlefields across Afghanistan and Iraq. Yet here they were, trapped like rats in an American port warehouse, their odds diminishing by the minute. "Status report," John whispered, his voice barely audible over the sporadic gunfire outside. Maria Davis looked up from where she knelt beside Chief Robert Johnson, her hands slick with blood as she pressed a makeshift bandage against his shoulder wound. "Chief's stable for now, but we need evac soon," she reported, her medical training evident in her calm efficiency despite the chaos. The rest of the team huddled behind whatever cover they could find. Concrete pillars, metal crates, abandoned machinery. Their ammunition was dangerously low, their options fewer. Outside, voices shouted commands in a mixture of Eastern European languages, the sound of boots on gravel growing closer as the enemy tightened their perimeter. "They're moving into position for a final push," whispered Sergeant Torres, the team's communications specialist. His normally jovial face was now etched with tension as he peered through a narrow gap in the warehouse wall. John nodded grimly. Conserve ammo. Make every shot count. He'd led these men and women through hell before, but this time felt different. This wasn't some distant desert. This was home soil. The thought of dying here, so close to safety, twisted in his gut like a knife. A sudden crack split the air, sharper and closer than the previous gunfire. Concrete dust rained down as a bullet struck inches from John's head. The team instinctively ducked lower, recognizing the distinctive sound of a sniper rifle. "Sniper, east side," Torres hissed, pressing himself flatter against the floor. John's mind raced through their dwindling options. A skilled sniper would pick them off one by one if they tried to move. They were pinned down with no counter-sniper of their own. Then it happened. A thunderous boom echoed across the port, deeper and more powerful than the enemy's rifle. Through the warehouse's broken window, John watched as a figure on the opposite rooftop suddenly jerked backward, then tumbled from its perch, rifle falling separately. The SEAL team exchanged bewildered glances. That shot had come from somewhere else. Someone with serious firepower had just eliminated their most immediate threat. "Command," John whispered into his radio, confusion mixing with the first spark of hope he'd felt in hours. "Do we have friendly assets in the area? Someone just took out an enemy sniper." The radio crackled with static, then silence. Whoever their mysterious guardian was, they weren't on any official channel. But for the first time since this nightmare began, Lieutenant Smith allowed himself to believe they might actually survive the night. A wave of confusion and awe rippled through the SEAL team. Lieutenant John Smith pressed the blood-smeared radio against his ear, hardly believing what he'd just witnessed. The enemy sniper who had been pinning them down for the last 20 minutes was suddenly gone, neutralized by an unseen guardian. "Command, do we have friendlies in the area?" John whispered, a flicker of hope warming his voice for the first time since they'd been trapped. Chief Robert Johnson lay grimacing against the wall, his leg hastily bandaged by Maria Davis, who looked up with equal parts skepticism and hope. The radio crackled with static before a response came through. "You have Overwatch support," the command voice replied cryptically. "Call sign Collegiate." "Collegiate?" Maria mouthed silently, exchanging bewildered glances with the others. Military call signs typically referenced predators or mythological figures, not academic institutions. Before John could request clarification, a young woman's voice cut through the static. Clear, calm, and precise, it carried none of the hardened edge of a seasoned operator, yet conveyed absolute certainty. "North exit will be clear in 30 seconds. Move when I tell you." The SEALs blinked in disbelief. Their lives now depended on someone who sounded like she belonged in a lecture hall rather than a combat zone. John hesitated, his training warring with desperation. "Who the hell is this?" he demanded, even as he signaled his team to prepare for movement. "Someone who can see 3 hostiles approaching your position from the west," the voice replied evenly. "And someone who just eliminated their Overwatch." As if to punctuate her point, another crack echoed across the industrial complex, followed by the distant thud of a body hitting metal. "That's 2, she said, matter-of-factly. Maria tightened the bandage around Robert's thigh. "Sir," she said to John, "whoever she is, she's our only shot at getting the chief out alive." John nodded grimly. "Copy that, Collegiate. We're ready on your mark." 10 seconds, the voice responded. "They're regrouping, but I've got clear shots on anyone who moves toward the north corridor." The team gathered their wounded, weapons at the ready. A civilian, not a soldier, had somehow become their guardian angel. Through his scope, John could see the north exit, seemingly miles away across open ground that had been a death trap moments earlier. "Now," the voice commanded, "move fast. I've got you covered." The team surged forward, carrying their wounded, as the mysterious sniper kept her promise. With each step toward safety, the impossible reality sank in. They were being saved by someone who had no business being in this fight at all. Hours earlier, Emma Johnson, hunched over her chemistry notes in the University of Washington library, the fluorescent lights casting a sterile glow over pages filled with molecular formulas. The 21-year-old sophomore traced carbon bonds with her pencil, lost in the elegant symmetry of organic compounds. Around her, other students tapped at laptops or whispered in study groups, but Emma had perfected the art of tuning out distractions. Her dark hair fell forward as she leaned closer to her textbook, double-checking her calculations for tomorrow's exam. Professor Whitman was notorious for his challenging questions, and Emma was determined to maintain her perfect GPA. The daughter of 2 university professors, academic excellence wasn't just expected, it was the family tradition. The vibration of her smartphone against the wooden table startled her. Emma frowned at the unknown number lighting up her screen. Normally, she'd ignore calls during study sessions, but something, intuition perhaps, made her gather her books and step into the quiet corridor before answering. "Hello?" she whispered, one finger pressed against her other ear. "Emma Johnson?" The voice was male, elderly, with a gravelly texture that spoke of years of command. "Yes, who is this?" she asked, tension creeping into her shoulders. "Colonel James Sullivan. I served with your grandfather in Berlin during the Cold War." The old man's tone carried urgency beneath its military precision. "William spoke of you often, said you inherited his gift." Emma's breath caught. Her grandfather rarely discussed his military past with anyone outside the family. The special bond they shared during those quiet Montana summers, the rifle range behind his ranch, the patient lessons in wind calculation and breathing control, was their secret. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice dropping lower. "We have a situation. American servicemen trapped. No qualified assets within range." Sullivan's words came faster now. "Emma, I need you to listen carefully. Your grandfather always said you were the best natural talent he'd ever seen. Better than him, even." The young woman leaned against the cool library wall, her chemistry notes suddenly irrelevant. "I'm just a student," she protested, though her heart rate had already accelerated. "Not today," Sullivan replied. "Today, you're their only chance. Emma, I served with your grandfather in Berlin. We need you." In that moment, the library's academic sanctuary shattered around her. The equations and formulas that had occupied her mind seconds ago vanished, replaced by memories of rifle stocks against her shoulder, the smell of gunpowder, and her grandfather's gentle guidance. "Breathe with the earth, little eagle." Emma closed her eyes. She had inherited more than just her parents' academic aptitude. She had inherited a gift. And now, the world was calling. Emma closed her eyes, and memories washed over her like Montana rain. Her grandfather, William Johnson, standing behind her on the family ranch, his weathered hands guiding her small ones on the stock of a hunting rifle. She couldn't have been more than 12 years old, the weapon almost comically large against her frame. "Breathe with the earth, little eagle," William had whispered, his voice as steady as the mountains that surrounded them. "Feel the wind, respect the distance, but never fear it." Under his patient tutelage, Emma had learned to account for elevation, to read the subtle dance of grass blades indicating crosswinds, to time her shots between heartbeats. Those childhood lessons had seemed like games then, special time with Grandpa during summer visits. She'd never imagined they would matter beyond friendly competitions and hunting trips. Yet William had trained her with the precision and dedication of someone passing down not just a skill, but a legacy. Colonel James Sullivan's voice pulled Emma back to the present, his words heavy with urgency. "Lieutenant Smith's team is pinned down. Hostiles have them surrounded in that warehouse." The colonel spread satellite images across the table, pointing to thermal signatures representing human bodies. "They've got wounded. Chief Johnson took a round to the shoulder, and Davis is doing what she can, but they're running out of options." "How long until official support arrives?" Emma asked, her throat suddenly dry. 4 hours, minimum," Sullivan replied, not meeting her eyes. "By then, it'll be a recovery mission, not a rescue. Emma's hands trembled as she traced the contours of the map. And there's no one else? Every qualified sniper is deployed or too far away. The colonel's weathered face softened slightly. Your grandfather says you can outshoot most professionals, says you have a gift. Emma thought of her parents, university professors who believed in dialogue over force, who had always viewed her grandfather's lessons with quiet disapproval. They'd never understood this part of her, the part that could calculate wind drift and bullet drop as easily as chemical equations. These are real people, Emma, Sullivan continued. Not paper targets. Once you cross this line, there's no going back. She closed her eyes again, seeing the faces of the trapped SEALs she'd never met. Lieutenant Smith, Maria Davis, Chief Robert Johnson, people with families, with futures hanging in the balance. You can do this, the colonel pleaded, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma's hands steadied as her resolve hardened. Show me the position, she said, her decision made. And get me that rifle. Emma Johnson stared at her chemistry notes, the molecular structures blurring before her eyes as her mind drifted to the impossible choice ahead. Her parents. Dr. Thomas Johnson and Dr. Rebecca Johnson, both tenured professors at the University of Washington, had raised her with clear values about violence. They were academics who believed in dialogue, in reason, in the power of education to transform the world. The world needs fewer guns, not more skilled shooters, her father had insisted during their last heated argument when she'd mentioned visiting her grandfather's ranch. The disappointment in his eyes had stung, but Emma understood his perspective. Her parents had dedicated their lives to knowledge, not combat. But her grandfather's wisdom carried a different weight. William Johnson had taken her to the shooting ranges of Montana since she was 12, teaching her to read the wind, to calculate distance, to become one with the rifle. Little Eagle, he'd call her, as she hit targets most trained soldiers couldn't touch. Sometimes you must stand between the wolves and the sheep. When that day comes, you'll know. That day had arrived, unexpected and unwelcome. Emma closed her textbook with a quiet finality. The library around her hummed with normal college life, students cramming for exams, couples whispering between bookshelves, the soft tapping of keyboards. How strange that this world continued while elsewhere men fought for their lives. She pulled out her smartphone and typed a quick message to her roommate, Sarah. Working late at the chem lab, don't wait up. The lie felt necessary, a small betrayal that might spare her friend from worry. Gathering her backpack, Emma walked through the library's grand entrance into the cool Seattle evening. Memories of Montana's rolling hills and her grandfather's patient instruction flashed through her mind. The weight of the rifle against her shoulder, the satisfaction of a perfect shot, the quiet pride in William's eyes when she mastered a difficult technique. You have a gift, he told her once. Pray you never need it. As she stepped into the gathering darkness, Emma felt the transition happening within her. The college student with midterms and study groups was receding, and something else, something her grandfather had recognized long ago, was emerging. The analytical mind that excelled at chemistry calculations would now track wind patterns and bullet trajectories. The Montana hills of her childhood faded as she entered the shadows of war, leaving behind the safety of academia for the harsh reality of combat. Emma Johnson, granddaughter of a legendary sniper, was about to become exactly what her parents had feared, a weapon. Captain Marcus Vega stood motionless beside a black SUV, his military posture unmistakable even in civilian clothes. His eyes, trained by years of combat, scanned Emma Johnson with clinical precision as she approached the parking garage exit. No words of greeting, just a curt nod and get in. Emma slid into the passenger seat, her backpack, still heavy with chemistry textbooks, wedged between her feet. The captain started the engine and merged into Seattle's evening traffic, raindrops beginning to streak the windows as gray clouds darkened overhead. I'm going to be direct, Marcus said, his voice steady as he navigated through downtown. What's happening at the port isn't random. It's connected to bombings across Europe last month. Intelligence suggests it's the work of a group called Black Crescent. Emma stared at the passing cityscape, familiar streets suddenly feeling alien. The university, her apartment, her normal life, all receding with each mile. The team trapped in that warehouse was tracking a weapons shipment, he continued. They weren't supposed to engage, but something went wrong. Now they're surrounded by highly trained operatives with military-grade weapons. Traffic thinned as they headed south toward Tacoma. The captain's hands never left 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, his eyes constantly checking mirrors. "How did you find me?" Emma asked, her voice smaller than she intended. "Your grandfather. When Sullivan realized the situation, he called William immediately. Said we needed someone with exceptional skills who could deploy faster than official channels." Emma's phone buzzed, her roommate asking where she'd disappeared to. She switched it to silent, reality sinking in. People were dying while she debated whether to respond to a text. "Official sniper support is 4 hours out, minimum," Marcus explained, his tone softening slightly. "By then, those SEALs will be dead. Lieutenant Smith and his team need someone now." They passed the city limits, rain falling harder now. Emma thought about Chief Robert Johnson bleeding on a warehouse floor, about Maria Davis trying desperately to save him. People with names and families waiting for help that might never come. "This isn't just about today," the captain said, glancing at her. "The intel suggests this is part of something much bigger, a conspiracy that crosses continents." Emma watched raindrops race across her window, thinking of her grandfather's words from years ago. "Distance and time are just math problems. Solve them, and you can touch anything." "I've never shot at a person," she admitted quietly. Marcus nodded, his expression unchanged. "I know, but those SEALs have never needed civilian help before either. Today, the lines are blurring for everyone." The abandoned ferry terminal stood like a ghost against the darkening sky, its weathered walls a testament to forgotten journeys. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs as she approached the makeshift command post. Colonel James Sullivan emerged from the shadows, his weathered face betraying both concern and relief. He extended his hand, not with the casual greeting of a civilian, but with the firm, measured handshake of a soldier acknowledging an equal. "Thank you for coming," the colonel said, his eyes evaluating her with professional assessment. Behind him, a military van sat with its rear doors open, revealing a long black case. Emma stepped forward, drawn to what lay inside. The Barrett M82A1 sniper rifle rested in custom foam, its matte black surface absorbing what little light remained in the day. She ran her fingers along the barrel, feeling the cold metal that could reach out and touch death from a mile away. "Your grandfather said you're the best shot he's ever seen," Sullivan remarked, standing beside her. "And William Johnson doesn't give praise lightly." Emma lifted the weapon, muscle memory taking over as she checked the action and sighting. The rifle felt both foreign and familiar in her hands. Heavier than her competition models, but balanced in a way that spoke to its lethal purpose. "The scope is zeroed for 800 meters, Sullivan explained. "You'll have about 20 minutes to familiarize yourself before we move to position." As the colonel stepped away to confer with Captain Vega, Emma pulled out her smartphone. Her finger hovered over her grandfather's contact for several seconds before she pressed call. The connection crackled with distance and perhaps something more, the weight of generations and choices. "Little Eagle," William Johnson answered, using the nickname he'd given her years ago on that Montana rifle range. His voice carried both warmth and a steely edge that came from decades of similar moments. "Grandpa," she whispered, turning away from the others. "They called me in for a sniper operation." A long silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken history. "You don't have to do this," he finally said, his tone gentle but resolute. "This isn't your fight." Emma watched as Sullivan unfolded a map of the port complex, Captain Vega's finger tracing routes between buildings. In her mind, calculations of wind vectors, humidity factors, and distance compensations already formed with mathematical precision. "But you know why you must," her grandfather continued, his voice now carrying the weight of his own past decisions. "Sometimes standing aside is the greater sin." Emma took a deep breath, feeling the cool evening air fill her lungs. "I know," she replied. "I'll call you after." As she ended the call, Emma turned back to the rifle, her bridge between the academic world she knew and the shadowy battlefield that awaited. The water tower loomed over the Tacoma Port Industrial Complex, like a sentinel from another era, its rusted metal frame silhouetted against the darkening sky. Emma Johnson adjusted the strap of the Barrett M82A1 across her back, each step up the maintenance ladder sending vibrations through her body. Her hands, steady when holding the rifle, now trembled slightly as she climbed toward a moment that would forever divide her life into before and after. "Keep moving," Captain Marcus Vega whispered from below, his voice barely audible over the distant popping of gunfire. The military officer maintained a vigilant watch, scanning for threats with each rung they ascended. His presence was both reassuring and terrifying, a reminder that this was no training exercise in Montana's peaceful hills. The chemistry equations Emma had been studying just hours ago seemed to belong to another lifetime. Now, calculations of wind velocity and bullet drop replaced molecular formulas in her mind. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her thoughts. "Breathe with the earth, little eagle." When they reached the platform encircling the water tank, Emma dropped to her stomach and crawled to the edge. The captain took position behind her, binoculars raised. "2 minutes to assess, then you make the call," he said, his professional demeanor never wavering. Through her scope, the sprawling chaos of the warehouse district came into sharp focus. The University of Washington Library, with its quiet corners and fluorescent lights, couldn't have been further away. Here, life and death played out in real time. Emma spotted Lieutenant John Smith's team first, 6 figures huddled behind concrete barriers, muzzle flashes illuminating their desperate defense. Chief Robert Johnson lay prone, his uniform darkened with what she knew must be blood. Maria Davis crouched beside him, her hands working frantically to stabilize his wound. "I count 15 hostiles," Emma whispered, her analytical mind mapping the battlefield. 3 teams, coordinated movement patterns. She tracked their positions, noting how they communicated through hand signals, their discipline revealing professional training. Then she saw it, the glint of scope glass from a second-story window 3 buildings east. Another flash from the rooftop opposite. Snipers, methodically hunting the trapped seals, waiting for any exposure to deliver a killing shot. "They're being hunted," Emma murmured, a chill running through her despite the evening warmth. Captain Vega nodded grimly. "That's why you're here." Emma took a deep breath, settling into the cold calculation her grandfather had taught her. The distance, the wind, the angle, all became variables in an equation where the solution meant life or death. Her world narrowed to the crosshairs and her breath. The future was unknown, but her path was suddenly, terrifyingly clear. "Collegiate Online," Emma whispered into her headset, her voice steady despite the hurricane of emotions raging inside her chest. The water tower provided perfect visibility across the port complex, but also left her exposed to the elements. A gust of wind brushed against her face as she settled behind the Barrett. Lieutenant John Smith's voice crackled through the headset, skepticism dripping from every word. "Tell me you know what you're doing." The SEAL leader sounded exhausted, desperate, and understandably doubtful about placing his team's survival in the hands of a college student. "I've got you covered," Emma replied, adjusting her position slightly. Captain Vega crouched nearby, scanning the perimeter with binoculars, his presence both reassuring and pressuring. Emma's world narrowed to the crosshairs of her scope, all distractions fading away. The chemistry equations that had consumed her hours earlier seemed to belong to another lifetime. Now, molecular bonds gave way to wind calculations and range estimation. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind. "Breathe with the earth, little eagle." Through the scope, she spotted movement in the east window of the warehouse, a shadow shifting, the unmistakable silhouette of a rifle barrel appearing. The enemy sniper was repositioning, preparing to eliminate one of the trapped seals. "On target," she murmured, her finger caressing the trigger. Emma inhaled deeply, held for 2 seconds, then released half her breath. Time seemed to slow as she squeezed. The Barrett's thunderous roar split the day, the massive rifle punching against her shoulder with brutal force. Through the scope, she watched the enemy sniper crumple, his weapon clattering to the ground. A life ended in an instant by her hand. "East sniper down," Emma reported mechanically, already shifting her aim to the next threat. Her analytical mind processed the reality. One death had just given 6 others a chance at survival. "Holy shit," John's voice came through, a mixture of relief and amazement. "Whoever you are, Collegiate, keep it coming." Emma tracked a pair of hostiles moving toward the warehouse's north entrance, clearly planning to flank the SEAL team. She steadied her breathing, made minute adjustments for the crosswind, and fired twice in rapid succession. Both targets dropped. "North entrance clear," she reported. "You have 30 seconds to move positions if needed." Captain Vega nodded approvingly beside her. "Good work," he muttered, his eyes never leaving his binoculars. Emma felt strangely detached, as if watching herself from a distance. The University of Washington student, who had been stressing over finals, was now directing a battlefield from above, dealing death with mathematical precision. She had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. But there was no time for moral reflection. More hostiles were moving into position, and Lieutenant Smith's team was counting on her. Emma chambered another round, her hands steady, despite everything. Lieutenant John Smith and his team watched in stunned silence as another enemy combatant fell from Emma's precise shot. The machine gun team, that had been maneuvering to flank the SEAL's position, suddenly lost its leader, the man's body crumpling to the ground with mechanical finality. "Holy shit," Maria whispered, her hands still bloody from tending to Robert's wounds. "Who is this girl?" The Barrett's thunderous report echoed across the port complex as Emma eliminated the second gunner before he could drag the weapon to cover. Each shot was methodical, each kill a calculated decision based on threat assessment rather than emotion. Through her scope, Emma tracked the remaining hostiles, prioritizing targets with military precision that belied her civilian status. The crosshairs settled on a man carrying ammunition boxes. She exhaled slowly, just as her grandfather had taught her, and squeezed the trigger. The recoil barely registered anymore. "Collegiate, this is Eagle 1, John's voice crackled through her headset. "You just saved our asses. Again." Emma acknowledged with a terse, "Roger," but inside her mind was racing. These were not the paper targets she'd practiced on in Montana. Each squeeze of the trigger ended a life, men with families, histories, futures. The abstract concept of killing had become viscerally real, leaving an imprint she knew would never fade. She shifted position slightly, scanning for new threats. William's lessons echoed in her mind. "Little Eagle, sometimes the hardest choice is the right one. When you stand between the wolves and the innocent, hesitation costs lives." Below, the SEALs used the opportunity to reposition. Maria helped Robert limp toward better cover, while John coordinated their movement with hand signals. Emma provided overwatch, her rifle barrel tracking methodically across windows and doorways. "2 hostiles, east entrance," she reported calmly, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Another shot, another life ended. The mathematics of survival were brutally simple. Their lives or the SEALs. Captain Vega maintained silent vigilance beside her, occasionally marking targets she might have missed. "You're doing well," he murmured, the closest thing to praise she'd heard from him. Emma's finger tensed on the trigger as she spotted movement near a stack of shipping containers. She hesitated briefly, confirming it wasn't a civilian worker caught in the crossfire, then took the shot. Through it all, her hands remained steady, even as her soul trembled. Her grandfather had prepared her for the physical act of shooting, but nothing could have prepared her for the weight of taking lives. Still, Emma continued her grim work. Each bullet fired meant one less threat to the trapped Americans below. This was the price of stepping between the wolves and the sheep, and for now, she would pay it. "Target acquired, but I need confirmation," Emma whispered into her headset, her eye never leaving the scope as she tracked another hostile moving between shipping containers. Colonel James Sullivan's voice cut through the static with unmistakable urgency. "Their leader is Nikolai Petrov, ex-Spetsnaz. If you can take him, everything changes." Emma's finger paused on the trigger. The name sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the wind whipping across her position. Petrov. Her grandfather had spoken of him in hushed tones during their long evenings on the Montana ranch. A ghost, a legend, a man who had eluded death so many times that some believed he couldn't be killed. "I know that name," she replied, scanning the battlefield methodically. "Grandpa said he was the best sniper in the Eastern Bloc during the Cold War." "And now he's here," Sullivan confirmed. "Intelligence suggests he's coordinating this entire operation personally." Through her scope, Emma watched as another enemy sniper took position on a rooftop. She exhaled slowly, squeezed the trigger, and the Barrett roared. The hostile dropped. Lieutenant Smith's voice came through immediately. "Nice shot, Collegiate. That's 4 down." But Petrov remained invisible. Emma shifted positions, calculating angles and likely vantage points. A master sniper would never expose himself unnecessarily. He would use terrain, shadows, and misdirection, all the lessons her grandfather had taught her. "He knows someone's hunting his team," Captain Vega observed quietly from his position nearby. "Look at their movement patterns changing." Emma nodded. The remaining hostiles were adapting, using different cover, communicating with more discipline. The enemy was learning, evolving in real time. Worse, they were starting to converge on possible counter-sniper positions, including hers. "Sullivan, they're hunting me now," she reported, keeping her voice level despite the growing knot in her stomach. "Petrov's coordinating a sweep pattern. He's figuring out your location based on your shot trajectories," Sullivan confirmed. "This isn't just tactical anymore. It's personal. He knows someone skilled is out there." Emma eliminated another hostile, but the victory felt hollow. For every enemy she dropped, Petrov seemed to gain more insight into her position and technique. She was winning battles, but potentially losing the war. "I think he's baiting me," she realized aloud, "sending his men as sacrifices to narrow down where I am." A bullet struck the metal just inches from her position, confirming her fears. The hunter had become the hunted. Somewhere out there, the legendary ghost of Spetsnaz was watching, waiting, and planning her demise. The impact came without warning. Bullets slammed into the water tower's metal skin, sending a shower of rusted shards flying through the air. Emma Johnson instinctively ducked as Captain Vega grabbed her shoulder, pulling her toward the escape route they'd planned. "Move, now!" he shouted, his voice barely audible over the metallic ping of incoming rounds. Emma slung the Barrett over her shoulder, fingers still tingling from the recoil of her last shot. The enemy had found them. The relative safety of their perch had become a death trap in seconds. They rappelled down the tower's eastern side, ropes burning through their gloves as they descended at dangerous speed. A bullet whizzed past Emma's ear, so close she felt its heat. The sniper was good, professional, calculating wind and drop with precision that matched her own. "Sullivan, we're compromised," Vega barked into his headset as they reached the ground, crouching behind a shipping container. "Need immediate extraction." Colonel James Sullivan's voice crackled through their comms, tension evident despite the static. "Petrov's counter-sniper has you in his sights. Fall back to secondary position." Emma's breath caught in her throat. "Petrov? The Russian? He's calling you Ghost Wolf's cub," Sullivan continued, his tone grave. "He knows exactly who you are, Emma. This isn't random." The revelation hit her harder than any bullet could. Her grandfather's nickname during the Cold War had been Ghost Wolf, a legend among snipers, feared even by the Soviets' best. Now his legacy had found her, dragging her into a conflict that had begun decades before her birth. "My grandfather never mentioned Petrov," she whispered, as they darted between shadows, making their way toward the extraction point. Vega's eyes narrowed. "Some enemies you don't talk about, not even to family." They paused at a corner, checking for movement. Emma's mind raced through calculations, not just of trajectories and wind speeds now, but of history and vendettas. The mathematical certainty of her academic world seemed impossibly distant. "This isn't just about the SEALs anymore, is it?" she asked, already knowing the answer. Sullivan confirmed her fears. "Petrov and your grandfather have history. Bad blood from Berlin, '89. William took a shot that Petrov never forgot." Another burst of gunfire forced them to change direction, ducking through an abandoned office building. Emma realized with startling clarity that she hadn't simply stepped into a rescue mission. She'd been drawn into a decades-old game of vengeance where she was both player and prize. "So I'm what? Bait? Revenge?" Her voice remained steady despite the churning in her stomach. "You're the weapon he never expected," Sullivan replied, "and right now, you're the only chance those SEALs have." Bullets ricocheted off metal as Emma Johnson and Captain Marcus Vega fled the water tower. The captain shoved her into the waiting black SUV, diving into the driver's seat in one fluid motion. The vehicle's tires squealed against asphalt as Vega slammed the accelerator, launching them forward just as a spray of bullets shattered the rear window. "Keep your head down," he shouted, swerving between shipping containers. Emma clutched the Barrett rifle to her chest, her heart hammering against her ribcage. The military officer navigated the industrial maze with practiced precision, taking sharp turns that threw her against the door. Through the side mirror, Emma glimpsed two vehicles in pursuit. "2 o'clock," she warned, her voice steadier than she felt. Vega nodded, yanking the wheel hard left, sending them skidding between two warehouses barely wide enough for the SUV. "They know the Ghost Wolf's granddaughter is here," Vega said grimly, referencing the nickname enemies had given her grandfather years ago. "You've made quite an impression." The vehicle bounced violently as they hit a loading dock ramp, momentarily airborne before crashing down. Emma's teeth rattled, but her grip on the rifle never loosened. The University of Washington student had transformed into something else entirely in the span of hours. Vega cut the headlights as they entered a darkened section of the port, the engine's roar echoing off metal containers. They lost their pursuers in the labyrinth of the Tacoma complex, eventually slowing near an abandoned shipping office. When they finally stopped, Emma's hands began to tremble, not from fear, but from the fading adrenaline. The reality of what she'd done crashed over her. She had taken lives, multiple lives, people with families, with stories, with futures, all ended by her precision and skill. "Does it get easier?" she asked quietly, looking at her steady hands that had delivered death with such clinical efficiency. The question hung in the air between them. Captain Vega's expression softened slightly as he checked his weapon. "No," he answered, meeting her eyes directly. "And if it ever does, that's when you need to worry." He paused, checking their surroundings before continuing. "What you did saved American soldiers. Remember that." Emma nodded, but the weight remained. She thought of her parents, both professors who had raised her to value peace above all. What would they think of their daughter now? "We have 15 minutes before we need to reach the secondary position," Vega said, interrupting her thoughts. "Lieutenant Smith and his team are counting on us." Emma took a deep breath, steadying herself. The college student was gone. The sniper remained. Perched atop a rusted shipping container, Emma Johnson settled into her new position. The Barrett felt heavy against her shoulder, but her hands remained steady as she scanned the industrial complex through her scope. 300 yards away, the SEAL team had regrouped behind a concrete barrier, their movements precise despite exhaustion. "Collegiate, this is Bravo 1. Lieutenant John Smith's voice crackled through her headset. "We've secured the North Quadrant. What's your visual?" Emma exhaled slowly, adjusting her aim. 3 hostiles moving east, 2 more by the loading dock. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle kicked against her shoulder, and one of Petrov's men dropped. "Make that 4 remaining." Captain Vega kept watch behind her, binoculars trained on the warehouse's western approach. "They're losing formation," he muttered. "Getting sloppy." She could see it too. Without their sniper support, Petrov's forces were fracturing, their coordinated assault dissolving into desperate individual actions. Another shot, another fallen enemy. The mathematics of death, clean, precise, terrible. Through her scope, Emma watched as Maria Davis dragged Chief Robert Johnson to better cover. The medic worked quickly, her hands bloodied but movements confident as she tended to her wounded teammate. John directed the remaining SEALs with hand signals, their defensive perimeter tightening. "Something's wrong," Emma whispered, more to herself than to Vega. The remaining hostiles were retreating too easily, abandoning positions that had strategic value. "It's like they're being pulled back." Colonel Sullivan's voice cut through her thoughts. "Be advised, satellite thermal is showing movement 3 blocks south. Could be reinforcements." But Emma sensed a different truth. This wasn't about reinforcements. It was about regrouping. Somewhere in the shadows, Nikolai Petrov was watching, adapting, planning. The Russian sniper hadn't fled. He was merely changing the game. "He knows I'm here," she said quietly. Vega glanced at her. "You can't know that." "I can feel it." The certainty settled in her bones like winter frost. Her grandfather had described this sensation, the awareness of being in another sniper's thoughts, a deadly intimacy. As twilight deepened, a SEAL she hadn't met before, Reynolds, according to the patch on his vest, approached their position during a rotation. His face was streaked with dirt and blood, eyes wary but grateful as he looked up at Emma. "Whatever brought you into this fight, we owe you," he called up. "You saved our lives back there." Emma nodded but couldn't find words to respond. What could she say? That she was just a chemistry student who should be studying for finals? That she'd killed men today with the same hands that took lab notes yesterday? She turned back to her scope, scanning the darkening port. The immediate danger had passed, but Emma knew with cold certainty that this battle was only beginning. Somewhere out there, Petrov was waiting, and now he knew her too. Emma Johnson lay on the narrow cot in the safe house, her body exhausted, but her mind refusing to surrender to sleep. The industrial ceiling fan spun lazily above, casting rhythmic shadows across the bare walls. Her hands remained steady, unnervingly so, even as the day's events replayed in vivid detail behind her closed eyelids. Each shot she had taken echoed in her memory. The crack of the Barrett, the millisecond delay, then the distant fall of a human being. Mathematics and physics transformed into life and death decisions. She had saved lives today, but had also taken them. The line between hero and killer had never seemed so thin, so permeable. The safe house door creaked open. Captain Marcus Vega entered, carrying 2 steaming mugs. The military officer's face showed the strain of the day, but his movements remained precise, controlled. "Thought you might need this," he said, offering her a cup of bitter coffee. Emma sat up and accepted it gratefully, wrapping her fingers around the warmth. "Any news?" she asked, blowing across the surface of the dark liquid. Vega nodded, settling into a metal folding chair across from her. The SEAL team made it to the extraction point. Lieutenant Smith radioed in, "They're safe." "And Chief Johnson, Maria?" Emma asked, remembering the wounded team members she had glimpsed through her scope. "Both wounded but stable. They'll recover," Vega replied. "Smith asked me to pass along his thanks, said they wouldn't have made it without you." Emma nodded, relief washing through her, but it was quickly followed by a hollow feeling. "And Petrov?" Vega's expression darkened, vanished like a ghost. Colonel Sullivan has teams searching, but he let the sentence hang unfinished. The weight of this revelation settled over Emma. Nikolai Petrov knew who she was now. The connection to her grandfather, to their shared past, it had become personal. The University of Washington library seemed a lifetime away. Her chemistry notes and exams, trivial compared to what she had just experienced. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "That depends," Vega said, studying her face. "Your life won't go back to normal, Emma. Not after today. Petrov doesn't forget, and he doesn't forgive." Emma stared into her coffee, seeing her reflection distorted in the dark surface. The college student who had walked into the library this morning no longer existed. In her place sat someone different, someone who had made impossible choices and would need to live with them. "I never wanted this," she whispered. "Few who are good at it ever do," Vega replied softly. Colonel James Sullivan leaned against the window frame, his weathered face reflecting years of difficult decisions. He watched Emma Johnson as she sat alone in the safe house living room, her fingers still instinctively checking the disassembled Barrett rifle parts spread across the coffee table. "You have options," Sullivan said, breaking the silence. "You can walk away now. Return to your chemistry books. Pretend this never happened. We'll ensure your safety." Emma looked up, her eyes carrying a weight that hadn't been there when she'd first climbed that water tower. "And the other option? Join us. The Black Crescent isn't finished, and Petrov is just their instrument. Behind him stands the directive, people who've been orchestrating attacks across 3 continents." Sullivan's voice dropped. "We need someone with your perspective." The door opened, and Lieutenant John Smith entered. His arm was bandaged, but he moved with purpose. The team leader nodded respectfully to Emma. "I came to thank you," John said, settling carefully into a chair opposite her. "What you did out there, most trained operators couldn't have pulled it off." Emma's hands continued their mechanical work with the rifle. "I'm not a soldier." "No," John agreed. "Maybe that's what makes you valuable. You see things differently." He hesitated. "We could use someone like you. Not just your shooting, your mind." After the lieutenant left, Emma sat alone with her thoughts. The university seemed a lifetime away now. She picked up her phone and dialed the familiar Montana number. "You made your choice yet?" William Johnson asked. "Skipping pleasantries. I don't know if I can go back to normal life," Emma admitted. "But I don't know if I belong in this world either." Her grandfather was silent for a moment. "Let me tell you about Kandahar," he finally said. "It was 23 years ago. Your Colonel Sullivan was just a captain then. We were embedded with a special forces team when everything went sideways." Emma listened as William described the ambush, the betrayal by their local guide, and how a young Russian sniper, Petrov, had been ordered to execute the Americans. Instead, he'd spared William, creating a debt between them. "Petrov saved me, but at a cost. He was punished severely for his mercy. It twisted him." Her grandfather's voice grew heavy. "Now he's come to collect that debt from my bloodline. This isn't just about national security, Little Eagle. This is about finishing something that began before you were born." Emma closed her eyes. "So I don't really have a choice." "We always have choices," William replied. "But some debts can only be paid in blood." The Virginia training facility loomed like a fortress in the misty dawn. Emma Johnson stood at attention, muscles aching from yesterday's regimen, as Master Sergeant Frank Carter circled her with calculating eyes. 3 weeks into her training, and the university student had traded lecture halls for firing ranges, chemical formulas for ballistic calculations. "Again," Carter barked, his weathered face betraying nothing as he reset the timer. "Disassemble, clean, reassemble, combat conditions." Emma's fingers moved with growing confidence across the Barrett's components. The rifle that had once seemed impossibly heavy now felt like an extension of herself. Her time improved by 7 seconds, not enough for the Master Sergeant, whose grunt communicated volumes. "In the field, Petrov won't give you time to think," he said, the name of the ex-Spetsnaz sniper hanging in the air between them. He survived 3 decades because he becomes the environment. You need to disappear completely. The training transformed Emma physically. Her slender academic's frame developed wiry strength. Blisters hardened to calluses. She ran 5 miles before breakfast, crawled through mud under barbed wire, and learned to move through dense forest without disturbing a single leaf. Colonel Sullivan visited occasionally, watching her progress with quiet approval. "Your grandfather would be proud," he told her, after she'd broken the facility's long-distance accuracy record. But nights brought the memories. The face of the first man she'd killed at the port complex visited her dreams, not in accusation, but in silent acknowledgement of their shared humanity. Emma would wake, heart pounding, remembering the weight of that moment when she'd crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. Captain Vega found her one night at the outdoor range, firing round after round in the darkness. "Does it get easier?" she asked, not looking up from her scope. "The mechanics do," he answered, his usually stoic demeanor softening slightly. "The rest shouldn't." Carter's training moved beyond physical skills to the psychological game. "Petrov thinks 3 moves ahead," he explained during their tactical sessions. "He'll use your compassion against you. He'll make you hesitate." Emma absorbed everything: how to disappear in urban environments, how to read weather patterns that would affect a bullet's trajectory, how to remain motionless for hours while every muscle screamed for relief. "Combat sniping isn't just about the shot," Carter growled during their final week. "It's about becoming invisible. Petrov is a ghost. You must be too." Her body hardened, her mind sharpened. But the memory of that first kill, the knowledge of what it meant, never left her. Emma realized it wasn't supposed to. That weight was the difference between a shooter and a soldier, between someone who took lives and someone who carried the responsibility of each one. In the dimly lit war room at the Virginia facility, Emma Johnson stared at the wall of intelligence reports. Satellite images, intercepted communications, and threat assessments covered every surface. Colonel James Sullivan paced behind her, the weight of potential catastrophe evident in his posture. "Petrov's planning something massive," the colonel said, pointing to marked infrastructure targets across 3 states. Power plants, water treatment, communications hubs. Emma studied the patterns, her analytical mind, the same one that had excelled in chemistry, finding connections others missed. She traced lines between seemingly unrelated targets, then stepped back, eyes widening. "It's not the primary systems," she whispered. "Look at these secondary nodes. Backup generators, auxiliary water pumps, redundant communication relays. They're the real targets." Captain Marcus Vega leaned forward, brow furrowed. "Why target backups instead of main systems?" "Cascading failure," Emma explained. "Hit the primaries, and emergency protocols activate immediately. But if you quietly compromise the backups first, then trigger the primaries," she snapped her fingers. "Total collapse when everyone thinks they're safe." The team worked through the night, Emma's insights guiding them to uncover Petrov's full strategy. Lieutenant John Smith joined remotely, his team now recovered and hunting Petrov's operatives across the country. "We've got a location," Vega announced, placing a marker on the map. "Underground facility outside Richmond. Intelligence suggests it's their command center." The raid came at dawn. Emma watched from the tactical vehicle as special forces breached the compound. Gunfire echoed briefly before the all-clear signal came. Inside, they found abandoned equipment, half-eaten meals, and one wall covered with photographs. Surveillance images of Emma, her parents, and most prominently, her grandfather's Montana ranch. Master Sergeant Frank Carter examined a tactical map left behind. "This wasn't their base of operations," he growled. "It was a message." Emma's phone vibrated. Her grandfather. "They've been watching the property," William Johnson said, his voice steady despite the threat. "3 men in the trees yesterday. I recognize their pattern. It's Petrov." Colonel Sullivan's face hardened as Emma relayed the message. This was never about infrastructure, he realized. The entire conspiracy was elaborate misdirection, drawing resources away while Petrov pursued his real target. Me, Emma said quietly, and my grandfather. Sullivan began issuing orders, mobilizing teams, but Emma already knew what had to happen. This conflict, begun decades ago between two legendary snipers, would end where her journey began, in the Montana hills, where she first learned to shoot. "I'm going home," she said, her voice finding new resolve. The student had become the hunter, the Montana night wrapped around the Johnson ranch like a cold blanket. Emma Johnson and her grandfather William moved through familiar terrain with practiced silence, laying traps where childhood games once took place. The old sniper had prepared for this moment his entire life, the confrontation that would end a decades-long shadow war. "Remember, little eagle," William whispered as they checked their positions. "Petrov thinks like water. He'll find the path of least resistance." Emma nodded, her university life now a distant memory. The Barrett rifle felt like an extension of her arm as she settled into position overlooking the eastern approach. Her grandfather took the western ridge, their crossfire covering all possible angles. The attack came with the changing wind, figures materializing from the darkness like ghosts. Emma's training kicked in as she tracked movement through her scope, her breathing measured and controlled. The first shot was hers, a warning that sent Nikolai's men scrambling for cover. William's voice crackled through her earpiece. 3 on the north ridge, 2 more flanking the barn. The firefight erupted in earnest, muzzle flashes illuminating the Montana pines in strobing bursts. Emma moved positions 3 times, just as Master Sergeant Carter had taught her. "A stationary sniper is a dead sniper," his gruff voice echoed in her memory. A cry of pain cut through the night. Her grandfather had been hit. Emma's heart hammered against her ribs as she sprinted through the underbrush, rifle slung across her back. She found William behind a fallen log, clutching his shoulder. "Go," he urged, pressing a cloth to his wound. "Finish this." The confrontation came at the old hunting cabin. Nikolai Petrov stood in the clearing, his silhouette unmistakable against the moonlight. The ex-Spetsnaz operative had aged since the photos she'd studied, but his eyes held the same calculating coldness. "Ghost Wolf's cub," he called out, using her grandfather's old code name. "I knew you would come." Emma emerged from cover, her rifle trained on his chest. "It ends tonight." "It always ends with death," Petrov replied. "Your grandfather understood this in Kandahar." Emma's finger tensed on the trigger, every instinct screaming to end the threat. But in that moment, she saw what her grandfather had tried to teach her, the endless cycle of vengeance that had claimed too many lives. Her shot was precise, through Petrov's shoulder, mirroring her grandfather's wound. "Not with death," Emma countered as the Russian fell to his knees. "With choice." Colonel Sullivan's team arrived at dawn, securing Petrov and his surviving men. The intelligence they carried would dismantle the directives network. As medics attended to William, Emma watched the sunrise paint the Montana hills gold. The hunt was over, but her journey had just begun.